My name is Brian Winfield with Hydro One, and this is our first PUG. So we wanted a chance to tell the Hydro One story, as gory as it may be. I won't bore you with all of the details because that would take too long, but we'll go over some of the key features and some of the key highlights of what the Hydro One story is. Just a little bit about me. I've been with the Hydro One since 2005, and then since 2007, we've been with the distribution side, and so when the project kicked off and we needed somebody with some business knowledge on how designers do their work, that's where I came in. I spent the majority of my time as a designer. I worked my way up through supervision, did a little stint as a technical frontline manager, and ultimately onto the project. So we've been going now for 2 years and change. Actually, I think it was 1,401 days ago. We sat down and did a calculation that Dennis, Sergey, and I think a couple other SBS folks came to Toronto and did a pitch to Hydro One, and the rest is history. So that's how we go. I threw this one in for Paul. Paul, I just want to give you a little chirp. I know you had some issues with your flight. We did not. That's our track. So sometimes you win. So just a little introduction. We'll do just a kind of a corporate background for anybody who's not familiar with Hydro One. We are Ontario's largest electricity distribution and transmission service provider. So we have roughly 1.4 million customers, give or take. And we serve rural customers predominantly, so we don't have a whole lot of high-density urban areas. We would love more, and maybe someday we'll get some more. But 2015, we changed from a Crown Corporation over to a publicly traded company. So a bit of a shift for us there, and it started to really open some things up for us. One of the things I like about this slide, the did you know, we own, manage, and maintain enough electricity distribution line to wrap around the earth 3 times. So we got a lot of poles, we got a lot of wires, and the majority of our stuff is overhead. So where did we start? Current pain points, right? We had as Pat mentioned, a predominantly GIS-based design tool, ArcFM Designer. Been with it for 15 years. So I think I started design right around the time that ArcFM kicked off. So it's all I ever knew for design work within the company, but we had a lot of pain points, right? There was a lot of issues with it. Design tool had reached an end of life stage. The heavy customizations meant that we had very limited ability to improve. So if we needed improvements, very difficult to do that. The end user experience was really poor. So we found that a lot of designers were just disengaged, right? They were getting frustrated with it. The poor performance of the design tool often delayed work. We were seeing crashes and bugs and all kinds of things that was just delaying the work. So obviously that is a negative impact to customers as well. Costing tool was inconsistent and often don't trust the numbers. So that's something that was big for us and reflected in our customer experience as well. Design tool can't handle the complexity of some of our work. So 15 years ago when it started, it was great for, a single phase pole and a transformer. But as we move into, an ever-changing electricity distribution world, you get into some bigger circuit poles, 5 circuit poles, doing some crazy corners, things like that. And that design tool just really couldn't keep up with it. 300 plus users see their productivity and their effectiveness impacted with these design tools. So we have roughly 300 designers. It's around 350 if you count our subdivision group, which is they're within our group, but they specialize exclusively in subdivision design. So around 350. But the design tool requires a full integration with other strategic systems in GIS. So we had to interface with our ERP system, which is SAP, and we had to interface with our GIS system on the background, which is ArcGIS. And we found that tool over its lifespan, 15 years, just really wasn't cutting the mustard anymore. So we moved on. A little bit of the background. So DOT, I think a lot of companies love their acronyms, and Hydro One is no different. We love our acronyms. DOT project. So DOT stands for Design, Optimization, and Transformation. So we'll do a little overview on what we were looking for. Some of the main drivers we went over, the end-of-life technology. So the software itself was end-of-life, but also end-of-life hardware. We were envisioned as a mobile workforce for designers, which meant that we were in our trucks. And so to do that, we used ruggedized tablets. I think it was the Explorer C4s to start with, and we moved to the Explorer C5s. But of course, they are end-of-life. They're old. Windows 7 based machines just weren't going to work anymore, so we had to move on. significant manual maintenance around costing. So everything was embedded in that ARC Designer tool. So it was extracted from SAP, all the costing was extracted, and then rekeyed within ArcFM. So you can imagine the maintenance around that, right? Difficult, errors abound, and you run into a lot of issues. Big one here, and I've heard this from a lot of the other utilities so far at this conference, was desire to drive efficiency and standardization. So I think we all experienced that, and we were no different, right? That was something that we really wanted to accomplish. We wanted to look at correcting all the flaws and the inconsistencies, right? Which ties back to that efficiency and standardization. And, you know, through several different types of audits, we addressed a lot of areas of improvement. And so there was some, you know, obligations to meet those fixes and to make sure that we were doing our product properly. Just a quick slide on the business benefits. Just this is what we use to, you know, really push forward. I won't go over it because it's a lot of the similar things, but, you know, design productivity, increase FBC functionality or productivity. Again, an acronym. FBC is our clerical staff. So they're the ones that schedule the designer's work. They handle a lot of the customer interaction. Designers do the design work and push it to the clerical staff, the FBC. But we're very intertwined. So one of the big things was to improve that. Improve customer experience or customer service, right? Obviously, customers first. We want to make sure that we're giving the customer the best possible product. Provide training, enhance data quality, another common theme, I think, through everything that we've heard so far. The hardware replacements and business and technology support. So we wanted to make some changes all around. So we bit off a lot. Here's what's changing, right? So, you know, we've got a lot of systems in play. SBS, of course, layered on top of Autodesk. AutoCAD Map 3D 2021 is what we went with. We use Vault for the single source of truth, our single source of our designs and our drawings. We've got SAP, as I mentioned, as our ERP system, so we're interfacing with that. We use the SAP SD module to do cost calculations and contract generation, and then some others. MuleSoft is our primary integration system, and ArcGIS Field Maps is what we use for our mobile support. So we tie in with that ArcGIS system. And then Locana's in there as well. We partnered with Locana previously to do work with SAP Work Manager. And so they're on part of this project to do enhancements to that as well. So the AUD build, we spent a lot of time doing, you know, discovery, understanding requirements, understanding what needed to be done, making the plan, getting things rolling, and then we launched into the build. So before we started, we set ourselves just a few key objectives. And those of us on the team said, you know, we're going to put a banner up across our desks or tattoo it to our arms or whatever the case, right? But we wanted to make sure that we focus on a few things. Avoid at all costs a customized solution, right? We don't want to create an ARC 2.0. We wanted to avoid that customized solution. One of the big things that we wanted to do too was to decouple the design and estimating activities wherever possible. So in ArcFM, it's all in one. And I think I heard this from a couple this morning. You know, we want designers to be designers, right? We don't want designers to have to think about all of the extra things that go along with it. If you as a designer is thinking about, you know, do I have to add a bolt to a particular part? Are you really doing design work at that point? Or are you doing kind of clerical work? So that was a big one for us. Decouple that, move that away, and kind of make it into two separate activity types, right? Obviously, achieve consistent, repeatable designs and estimates. We wanted to make sure that across the province, you know, like I said, so many miles and miles and miles of wires. We have 300 plus ADETs spread all over the province. The ability to maintain consistency was difficult. So we're looking to use the automation abilities in AUD to actually make that happen. Reduce manual calculations, external calculators, and just chair swivels, right? So a lot of manual calculations. All of our engineering was done manually, by hand. So the designers would crack open their engineering standards book and to sit down and do pole classing. It's all longhand. They want to sit down and do guy calculations. It's all longhand. Voltage drop, well, we actually had a calculator, an Excel-based calculator to handle voltage drop off a transformer. But again, it's another calculator. That has to be maintained. It has to be kept in sync. All designers have to be kept using the same thing. So obviously lots of problems, right? And then create an agile, sustainable product. I think that's what we all want. So the implementation started January 2021. I guess it was actually towards the November of 2020 that we kind of got started. But it really began, and I really got thrown into the fire, I think around January 2020, January 2021. And so we started with a decomposition of our FM Designer. Because we bit off so much, we had SAP on the front end, we had GIS on the back end. It was split into 3 streams. And so we had the UDH-EAM on the front to interface with SAP, and we had UDH-GIS on the back end to interface with GIS. And then in the middle, sandwiched in the middle, was AUD-Config. So what better way to begin than understanding this beast of a product that we've been using for 15 years that had undergone so much customization, and the guys that were there creating it in the first place, they're long gone. They're either retired or they're moved on. And to really, really fully understand, we had to just break it all down. So pull in all the subject matter experts on ArcFM, and we set up regular meetings to really just break it down. How does this thing actually work? Strip it all down, and now let's build it back up, but build it better, right? So twice weekly requirements gatherings across the 3 streams. That combined with the SAP and MuleSoft integration, because those were 2 key components, obviously, to interface with the AM. We wanted to make sure that that development was ongoing. Didn't work out quite as planned. There were some delays and some slight postponements, I want to say, but best laid plans, right? The first usable Hydra One configuration was delivered to us by SBS within 2 months of starting those meetings. So what was great about that is that inside of those first 2 months, we'd broken everything down, we'd understood our requirements, we'd gave those requirements back to SBS, and then we had a product in our hands that we could actually use. So put it in the hands of the subject matter experts that are on the project, let them use it. And I've got a little quote in there, one of my favorite quotes. I've got several from Pat, but build a little, test a little, fix a little, right? And that's a great way to put it, because if you build the product all in a silo, all in silence, and then you hand it out, you're just going to have an absolute ton of things to fix. So why not do it step at a time, right? And that worked out really, really well for us. We got ourselves onto a bi-weekly release schedule. So SBS would deliver builds every other week and provide that real-time feedback. So every other week, the requirements gatherings would go on. We'd be refining. We'd do paired testing. I think, Marty, you were saying today it's called something different, but whatever the case, sit with the software developers, and they can watch you use the product, right? And then they can make suggestions. You can make suggestions. And it was just a really positive experience all the way around, because things were getting done. And you could see the product coming along and really developing quickly. So today, AUD development is complete. We are not in production. We're still a ways away from production. As I mentioned, there's been some speed bumps, some hiccups. We're still working through those. But on my side of the fence, the AUD build is basically done. So we're taking this opportunity now to do some extra refinements, to perfect it, to polish it up and shine it up and make it even better than what we originally thought we could. We're currently in SIT. I'm not sure extended or how that goes. So some AUD accomplishments. What I wanted to do, originally some of the things that I wanted to talk about, I think we saw from some of the presenters yesterday, which is amazing. So what I wanted to do is maybe just show some of the things that we've done within Hydro One that can, maybe give some ideas to some other people, and maybe they can use that in their areas as well. One of the ones Paul mentioned yesterday was Landbase. Using the Landbase, using web map services in AUD to kind of enhance that user experience, right? So one of the things that we have is a published Landbase layer, and it's the map of Ontario right now that you see, and it's scalable. So as you zoom in on that particular service, we have roads, waterways, we have lot concession, all kinds of things like that. So the the designer can zoom in and can see those things depending on where they are. The next thing we have is a distribution assets layer. And so this is an extract from our GIS, but published as a web map service. And so the designer can use this to navigate to the specific geographical location they are. They can get the lay of the land, understand the way that the distribution system is configured in that area, and just do some pre-planning, right? So the idea is, rather than the first thing you do is, leave the office to go for a drive to understand what's actually there, you can use these DX asset layers to get a bit of a feel for what you're getting yourself into before you actually start your job. One of the other things I didn't throw in here, but it's cool and it still blows me away. It's the integration with Net Maps. And so for Hydro One, we chose Google Maps. So Net Maps will actually interface with Google Maps. So you can actually use Street View or Google Maps overhead view, satellite view right within AUD. And it just gives you that much extra functionality on how to, preview your job, I suppose, or understand what you're looking at in the field. The UDH-EAM obligations. This is an interface with SAP. So this is in the EAM module, and this was one of our process developments, trying to make it better, trying to improve communication with our FBC, which I said was our clerical staff, but also others within the company. So what we did is we leveraged SAP on the notification. It has tasks, and tasks are kind of to-do lists. Previously in ArcFM, it was a completely disconnected system, so we really had no effective way of communicating back. It was a pick up the phone, or it was a send an email, or it was a get on Teams and send a message. What we've done is configured this so that we can send obligations instantly back and forth to SAP. And so that's our method of communication. So if the designer finds that there's an easement required because the anchor is going to drop onto some private property and we need to secure legal rights with the customer, then we can set that up on the notification, and that's available to anybody in the company that has access to SAP, which is our work management staff, which is our design services staff, all this kind of thing. And that's real time. So the instant that the designer clicks that and clicks save in EAM, transfers immediately through the interface up to SAP, and it's viewable right away. And this will also hit our dashboard. One of the tail end of the project is to incorporate dashboards as reporting mechanisms. So I think the EAM obligations is pretty cool. Work order properties is just that, it's job dependent. So we do everything from hooking up an individual customer to, a large municipal driven line relocate to an expansion 20 kilometers down the road to hook up a new generation facility. So we'll do any of those types of jobs. How do we know what those types of jobs are, right? They come from SAP. That's where our work is scheduled from. So the work order properties come in through EAM, and they're viewable to the user or to the designer, and they can start making decisions and understand how that works. The really great thing about AUD is you can write rules to understand this. And so depending on what the job type is, and I don't think I captured it in this slide, notification, there should be a notification type, but we have our own unique notification types. Depending on those notification types, the different sets of rules will apply. So if it's a straight new connect for just a new customer, there's a different set of rules on how materials get ordered and the costing is applied, different credits are applied. We have that ability to automate that, right? Because this information comes in through that integration, and we can develop a process for that. And so the AUD configuration gives us the ability to write rules. It's great. That open text URL that you see, that hyperlink, that takes us straight back into the open text container, which is a part of the SAP area. That's where our contracts and our estimates are located. But it's a
management system.
Sorry?
It's your document management
system. Exactly. I'm more of a business user. My colleague TC over there is more on the hardware side. Yeah. The AUD config. So I wanted to touch on some of the great things that we did. We worked with Sarah primarily as far as the config is concerned, and very patient. So thank you, Sarah. Appreciate your patience on that. We had 1 million questions, and you were able to answer 1,000,001. So somehow we managed it. But the automated work location with the standardized callouts. This was a big request for us, and we made it work. What works well for us in this case is that we have our engineering design standards on there. So as the designer drops the poles, the work location callout is created and the text is created, and it's dynamic, right? So all of that text comes from model tables. They're all model attributes. And then as they're digitized, as they're placed on the map, that text gets populated in the work location callout. So like I said, it's dynamic. If you've chosen a 45-foot class 3 pole, and all of a sudden you need to bump that to a 55, you change that, instantly reflected in the work location callout. So before, we talked about consistency designers would do it their own way. They would grab a text box, they would key in. Some of them didn't key anything at all. Some of them keyed in a story. There was paragraphs. So, this gives us the ability to say, just the bare minimum, right? This is for us, this is a regulatory requirement. We do need to put these specific standards on the face of our drawings. And so this was a big one for us, a big win. Engineering analysis, we've heard from that, and actually Matt was another one on our config development, and he did a great job with some of the really nitty-gritty engineering things. But basically, we took our engineering standards books, 2 giant volumes, and over the course of several months, figured out ways to get them in there so that AUD could run rules and could do pole classing for us, could do SAG calculations, could do the tensions, could do the guying. And that's a big one for us. That's a big win because our engineering group wants to make sure that we're building correctly. Obviously, we have to report back to the governing body. We have to say, yes, we are building things properly. We're designing things. My group designs things. The lines correct, the construct group, they construct things. But on the design side, we want to make sure that they're designed properly. So this was a big win for us. The fact that we could actually do this, automate it, and make it consistent. The other great thing is that if it's designed and it's not according to standard, that's where the validation rules come in, right? So the system will tell you, hey, that's not going to cut it, right? You're not going to be able to run with that. Automated material ordering is a big one too. Like that's a huge win for us. And I know I've heard from some of others today and yesterday. You've got CUs, and every company does CUs a little differently. For us, CUs in some cases are an individual part. Like for a pole, for instance, our 40-foot Class 3 pole, CU, that's one item. But there are other CUs that could be consist of 20 parts, right? So trying to understand how the CUs were built took a lot of time away from the designers, right? They had to understand from the cheat sheets. I think, was it SRP that was talking about the cheat sheets, right? Understand, they go to the cheat sheets. Well, okay, well, I got to put a pole in. Well, what else do I need? Well, I need my pole head framing. I need insulators. I need tie wire. I need grounding. I need all kinds of stuff. So those were all individual components. And before, that was all a manual exercise to click, grab, place, right? So the automated component of this is amazing. Kind of hard to see, but on the pole, work location 1, we got a pole, we got a pole head, we got an insulator, we got a preform, we've got the grounding, and all that was automatic. All the designer had to do was say, I want a pole, right? And everything else came in after that. So a pretty amazing step forward for us. Cost factors. So cost is kind of a dirty word for us a little bit. Our cost factors, we have to include it. But basically the way we ended up with is in AUD, in the design, we will, as designers, specify some cost factors. So things like, is it off-road? That's going to impact the cost. Is it eligible for alternative bid? In other words, could it go to a general contractor or are we going to do the build ourselves? There's all these cost factors that can be applied. We're not doing any costing in AUD. AUD doesn't do costing, but we're applying those cost factors and then we're passing that information out on the bill of materials or on the material submit. So the designer sets it all up ahead of time and then sends that information in that material submit over to SAP, and it takes those cost factors and it does what it needs to do with them. Once it leaves the designer's hands, usually we're not worried too much about it. We trust that SAP is going to work. Contestability rules. So contestability is a beast, and I would probably need at least another half hour to really give it some justice. But for us within Hydro One, contestability means who does the work, who's actually building, but also who's paying for it. And there's a lot of factors on when contestability is set and what type of contestability is set. Sarah was able to create this massive contestability engine that is able to do the automation on this based on things like the information from the work order properties that we had and based on some other factors. So that was almost a project in and of itself, is to go through these things, to sit down and 60, 70, some odd scenarios I think we ended up with across 5 or 6 different job types, just absolutely massive. But it was possible. It was one of those things that, we come and said, oof, I don't even know if this is something that we can do, but ask, and if it can be done, it can be done. So that was a big win as well. Validation, again, we talk a lot about validation, but for us, validation on the material submit, which is when we create our, take our bill of materials from our material list and we're sending it over to SAP to get that cost estimate generated. So before, there was no check and balance in ArcFM. You just hit a button and it generated the costs, and whatever you had in there, if they were right, they were right. If not, it was still going to go ahead and generate it anyway. So we had the opportunity to write some rules to validate that. This is just one example, right? In this case, we tried to push something out. We got a couple of messages back saying, hey, listen, you might want to check on your work type. Maybe that's wrong, but it also says there's required fields there. So you're not even going to go ahead and do a material submit. I'm going to stop you right there until you fix your errors, right? So for us, that's a big thing. 350 some odd users, you're going to get the ones that want to do what they want to do. And previously, we had a very difficult time correcting that behavior. Now, hard stop, right? And just a little example of our contracts, because this is, just kind of showing some of the integration. So this is an example of a contract that was spit out in SAP based on the information that AUD fed it. So CU lists, all those cost factors, and it took the information that was already in SAP from the work order properties, and it built this estimate, calculates the estimate, generates the PDF. And one other thing I wanted to talk about was the design container. And this is, Paul touched on it briefly yesterday, but just a really, really fantastic concept. I had a hard time wrapping my head around it for the longest time, but once I understood it, it was pretty impressive. So, it's that central spoke in our system where we have multiple software platforms, talking to it. And it houses the data that all those systems use while the design and the construct is in process. So our mobile application, which our designers use when they're in the field to gather field points, this is where the new pole has to go. This is a fire hydrant. This is a gas line, so I don't want to do any construct around here. All of those sorts of things are gathered in our mobile app and are then pushed back up into the design container. And then the information in that design container is available in AUD to make that educated design decisions. A couple of neat examples. We did manage to get the picture capability in there, so we can take a picture with our mobile device and attach it to that work order and have that present in the design container. So the design container is accessible to AUD. It's also accessible on the back end of the whole process to SAP Work Manager, which is what our line crews or our construct teams use. So they can actually then use that for doing as-built edits or red lines, send that back in through the container, and get picked up. And then the whole tail end of the process, and Paul alluded to it yesterday, was the GIS playback. So once everything's been sort of solidified in the design container and the as-builts are done, it can be played back through GIS and posted. So I wanted to talk a little bit about lessons learned. We had a good plan going in, but I think, as Pat mentioned, semi-agile is a great option, and so that's what we rolled with the punches. But one big thing, and I guess my advice, if I could go back 3 years and tell myself this, or talk to some others, just understand that in a lot of ways this isn't a turnkey solution, right? So this isn't something that just gets dropped into place and you just roll with it. It requires a lot of investment from the business, right? You have to understand your requirements and you have to be willing to sit down and work with the SBS developers to build that. There's a lot of effort required into building this. And some people might say, well, that's kind of weird, but the reality is that builds the engagement. That's my opinion anyway. It builds the engagement, right? So the users who are working on the project to develop it understand the product inherently. So those are automatically your first super users. And then that word spreads, and it spreads like wildfire. But make sure that you've got dedicated resources in place for the development and for the testing. That's crucial. The resources should be allocated accordingly, and they should be committed and engaged. There's nothing worse than getting somebody in on a project who's supposed to help with it, saying, I don't have time for this. Listen, I got other stuff on the go. We're going to have to reschedule this meeting, or this is garbage. What am I doing? You know what I mean? Like that just, it sinks the whole project. So take that opportunity up front before you even get rolling to make sure that the resources you're allocating to the project are engaged and are committed to it and who really want this, right? Those ones at the very least should be the ones who are working on this project. Big one, understand your requirements up front. So I'm not necessarily saying, we need X number of transformers and we need the conductor to look like this. Understand all your requirements, like have a really thorough understanding of the requirements, because there's nothing worse than sitting there and waffling on them and saying, I don't know, having a disagreement. One part of the business says we should be doing it this way. The other part says we should be doing it this way. Understand the way that needs to be done. And, you save a whole bunch of time all the way around. This one was a big one. Review your current process and workflow. That was a big one for us, understanding the way we did it. Another one of Pat's famous sayings, just because your daddy did it that way and your daddy's daddy did it that way, doesn't mean you have to do it that way, right? And that really resonated with us. It took a little while to sink in, Pat. I don't know how many times you had to say it, but it sunk in eventually. But take that opportunity to explore some other avenues, right? Don't try and take your old archaic processes and your old archaic workflows and jam them into AUD. Take the opportunity and see what AUD can do, right? You know what you need to get to, and you know where you're starting. Take the opportunity to rebuild that road. You know what I mean? And it just works a lot smoother. Some cases you might not be able to. There were places where we couldn't. We were obliged through regulatory commitments to have to do things a certain way. Fair enough. But anytime you can, look for some better ways to do it. Planning is key. So develop an implementation strategy that is agile, that's able to adapt to any speed bumps, and to take all your integrations into consideration. So if you are planning to do integrations, make sure you take all of that into consideration up front. Make that plan ahead of time and really stick to the plan of how to approach it, right? Leave adequate time for testing. Testing, whatever you think you need for testing, double it and then double it again. Understand data migration needs. So depending on what product you're using now and depending on where you want to end up, do you need data migration needs? Like what do you actually want to do? Are you going to take all your old designs? Are you going to migrate them? What are you going to do for in-flight designs? As you go into production, do you have 1,000 drawings sitting there in your old system that you may or may not need access to tomorrow after go live or after production, release? So make sure you really understand that and have a solid plan in place beforehand. A solid change management strategy. So change management team, change management strategy, just understand that, how important that is. And I talked a little bit about it, but you want to build that excitement. You want people to understand why you're doing it, right? And you want people to be on board. And I'm not just talking the people on the project, it's the people who are going to be using this afterwards at the end of the day. You want to build that excitement and you want to really get people energized for it. Change management is there to help. So make sure that you get them involved in that and don't let that slide by. Don't skimp from the budget on that. That's a big piece of the puzzle. Training. I don't know, it's probably even more important than change management, but training is key, right? Don't skimp on training. Make sure that you people have understanding of the product and implicitly. One of the big things that we're seeing now is, we've had a lot of users using it. And I'll be honest, myself, before I started on the project, I was not a CAD user. I'd used CAD a handful of times. So, my first couple of sessions sit down doing paired testing were very embarrassing because I didn't even know where to click. But in 2 years, I've come to the point now where I'm able to get in, I'm reverse engineering a bunch of Sarah's rules and writing my own rules and, exploring and doing things. And I just think it's cool that you're able to do that with a product like this. But training is key, right? You need to make sure that the people understand connectivity, and not just structural connectivity, not just electrical connectivity, understand why the rules are firing and when they're firing. Without that, the user's just going to say, this thing doesn't work. Well, it may or may not be user error, right? So training is key. And then the last thing, just plan for post-production sustainment. So how are you going to actually sustain the product? It's great that you've invested all this time up front and you've pushed it out the door. How are you going to maintain the product after that, right? So have a plan in place. Are you going to do it in-house? Are you going to sign some support contracts? Are you going to get some other people involved? What's the point or what's the idea? But you want to make sure that you have that in place. So that's it for me. More than happy to take questions if anybody has any. That's our dot vision board. I just wanted to share it because it was pretty impressive.
Yeah. I just had a question on your migration strategy. Have you guys worked out, like what the plan is for that, for the existing versions, designs? Are you going to try to go to state zero or are you?
So we went through several ups and downs. We went through several different iterations. Do we try and take them? Do we export them as like a geodatabase file or a JSON file from Arc Designer? the problem is the structure, the way that Arc Designer structured it really didn't fit with the way AUD had the structure. So you could get the two sets of raw files, but trying to match them up and do that migration was very difficult. At the end of the day, we decided that we would, sort of compact the scope of how many designs. We had TC, I don't know, you might say, there was tens of thousands of old designs kicking around, right, that we may or may not need access to. So in the end, we had to really kind of dial that back a little bit and say, all right, only in the last 6 months or only in the last 4 months or something like that will we actually start looking at trying to do migration. It wasn't great coming out of ArcFM. There wasn't a lot of options. So our migration strategy was rocky. And that's part of why I want to put that in there, right? Think about it up front. Like, and just, if you're planning an implementation, if you're planning a project, make sure you think about that up front so that you can take that into consideration and you can make the plans accordingly. Yeah.
So the main problem with theirs was the designer system calculated the cost. With the new SAP upgrade, it was only expecting values. So how do you get the values out of a system that already has the cost? So then we had to dumb down the design so that we can make them smart again, so that we can get them over into the format that SAP wanted. So so that on the document management system, they have two document management systems. The open text is the system level, where everyone puts their documents in there. AUD is connected to Vault, which is what he was showing there. So the designs are in Vault, and then the finished product goes up to open text.
Can you summarize the organizational changes, from production teams to change management, training, and support that resulted from this effort?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it for sure. So, the project team, we ramped up as far as resources, pulled in a lot of resources from the business. Obviously, we had input from IT, from our GIS department, from all kinds of things like that. So when the project ramped up, we had all kinds of resources on board. And we made plans for training, so we had a power user network, for instance, that would, go back to the areas and then would distribute the training that way, train the trainers, all that kind of thing. The support network it's taken a little bit longer to develop and how we're going to do that. We have Hydro One has an in-house distribution sustainment team, and trying to find the way to the best place for this sort of thing for all the activities to take place. Does it take place with the distribution sustainment team, or is this more of an ISD type related activity, right? And so that's where a lot of those conversations had to be. Where does it belong? Or where should it be? And those answers aren't always the same, right? And so there was a lot of discussion on that. I'll be honest, because we're still probably 6 months away from production, there's still some discussion to be had on those topics. But from the perspective, a lot of people came out of the business sort of on rotation, full-time, dedicated to the project, let's do this. On rotation. They'll return to the business as designers once the project's done. In some cases, they will be tapped to be those power users as well. So they'll go back and, like I said, they're already super users, right? They already understand the system better than a lot of people. So they're going to go back and do that. I'm not sure if that answered your question.
You were talking earlier about the DX assets and having GIS come in as a one-time import. How does that get updated? Is that kind of like there for just reference, or is that updated every so often?
Yeah.
How does that work?
Yeah, exactly. So it's a published service, right? So it's a static image. I guess one thing I didn't touch on too. So you see that, it's it's an onion skin overlay sort of thing. One of the other steps then is once you see it, when you want to interact with it, we'll draw a polygon, we'll import that feature, connects to our FTGIS, and it imports it as AUD features. So, it's just sort of a visual reference at that point. But that web map service, it's a great point, right? Especially in very active areas, things are changing, new lines going up, new subdivisions are getting built. It can be done on demand. The way that we've sort of set it up in the kind of sustainment model, we're talking about like a regular cadence, a monthly update or something like that, unless it's warranted and we need to go with every 2 weeks or something like that. In a case where, we've got some areas in the province that are like the Wild West, you know what I mean? It's like the gold rush time sort of thing. And there's just all kinds of work being done. And so in a case like that, it might make sense to do it on a 2-week schedule every so often. The guys who have to do that, they might not like that, but it keeps things fresh. It keeps things updated.